Burmese pythons have devastated native wildlife in the Everglades. Researchers turned to tech, hoping robotic rabbits can lure the snakes out.
Florida's robotic rabbit experiment was a bold move. They were designed to mimic life, to draw in the Everglades' top predator.
Florida is deploying robotic rabbits to help capture invasive Burmese pythons in the Everglades.
But something went terribly wrong. The robots, powered by AI, started doing things they weren't supposed to. They didn't just attract pythons, they attracted something else. The entire project collapsed, and what they found in the bellies of those predators shocked everyone to their core. When the Everglades fell, at sunrise, the Florida Everglades is like nowhere else on Earth. It's not just a swamp, it's a river of grass 60 miles wide and 100 miles long, flowing slowly south. It glows. It's a vast, shimmering mirror of sawgrass and slow-moving water where herons and egrets stand as still as statues, waiting for a ripple. This place is an American treasure, a unique ecosystem found nowhere else. But you see, beneath that quiet, prehistoric beauty lies one of the most damaged ecosystems in America. For decades, this massive wilderness has been under a silent attack. The invader isn't a chemical spill from a factory or a new housing project paving over the wetlands. This invader is alive, it's coiled, and to put it mildly, it's unstoppable. We're talking about the Burmese python, a giant constrictor born in the jungles of Southeast Asia that has turned Florida's wetlands into its personal empire. The thing nobody tells you is that this invasion wasn't a natural accident. It wasn't a case of snakes swimming across the ocean. It was a human mistake built over decades of carelessness. Back in the 1980s and 1990s, the exotic pet trade was booming. People were obsessed with owning something wild. Tiny baby pythons, just a couple of feet long, were sold in pet stores as harmless, easy-to-care-for curiosities. They were glossy, had beautiful patterns, and were calm enough to rest in a kid's hands. But those pets grew. And boy, did they grow. A baby python can become a 10-foot giant in just a couple of years. Within 5 years, many of them stretch to 15 or even 20 feet long. That's longer than a minivan. They became thick as a telephone pole and strong enough to crush a deer or even the Everglades' original apex predator, the alligator. Owners who weren't ready for a 200-pound, 20-foot monster in their bathtub started to panic. So they started quietly releasing them into the canals, swamps, and backyards of South Florida. They thought one little snake wouldn't hurt. They were wrong. Then in 1992, Hurricane Andrew tore through South Florida. The monster Category 5 storm flattened buildings, ripped homes apart, and crucially destroyed countless reptile facilities and breeding centers. An unknown number of pythons, thousands of them, were freed in a single night, spilling out into the wild. This event wasn't the start of the invasion, but it was the gasoline on the fire. It seeded the population that would, years later, completely engulf the Everglades. For a python, this new world was a paradise. It was even better than their native home. The Everglades offered perfect subtropical warmth, endless places to hide in the dense sawgrass, and most importantly, prey that had never evolved to fear a giant constrictor. The rabbits, raccoons, and birds of Florida had no idea how to defend against this new monster. With no natural predators of their own and the shocking ability to lay up to 100 eggs at a time, their population exploded. Biologists today admit they have no idea how many there are. The official estimate is tens of thousands, but many on the ground say it's more like hundreds of thousands. What they've done to the food web is a total, undeniable disaster. In the areas where pythons are the new top predator, there has been an almost complete vanishing of raccoons, opossums, and marsh rabbits. We're talking drops of over 95%. Think about that, an entire class of animals just gone. Even larger animals like white-tailed deer and bobcats have been hit hard. The stories from the swamp are terrifying. One python was captured with a whole adult deer inside its stomach. In another famous case, a python was filmed fighting an alligator. In the end, both of them perished, the snake having burst open after trying to swallow the gator. The loss of these species starts a chain reaction. When the small mammals disappear, the birds of prey that hunt them, like hawks and eagles, begin to starve. When the scavengers are gone, decaying bodies are left to rot, changing the very nutrients in the soil. The Everglades' delicate system, built over thousands of years, has started to completely break down under the python's crushing pressure. Scientists used to report seeing marsh rabbits in almost every part of the wetlands. Now, there are huge, sprawling areas where they can't find a single one. Florida had to fight back, but their first big plan was, to put it mildly, a total mess. The hunt becomes a joke. When state officials finally realized just how unstoppable the python invasion had become, they did what humans often do when faced with a wild, unmanageable problem. They turned it into a competition. They offered cash prizes, public glory, and the thrill of the hunt. In 2013, Florida launched the first ever Python Challenge. It was an open call to anyone, from any state brave enough to step into the swamp and try to remove these monsters. The concept was gutsy, maybe even a little desperate. The state would arm regular citizens with some basic online training, set them loose for a whole month, and pay cash for every snake they brought back. On paper, it sounded like a victory just waiting to happen. It was a great news story. In reality, it became a perfect and very public study in frustration. That first challenge pulled in more than 1,600 participants from all over the country. Hunters, adventurers, and thrill seekers showed up with airboats, machetes, pickup trucks, and flashlights strapped to their heads. TV crews from all over the world followed them around, turning the Everglades into a bizarre, surreal mix of a reality show and a survival contest. For days, the swamp echoed with the sound of boat motors, splashing boots, and people shouting as they scanned the reeds for that telltale shimmer of scales. The media loved it. The public was hooked. But the numbers, the numbers told a much harsher story. After weeks of backbreaking effort with over 1,000 people combing an area the size of a small state, the combined total haul was just 68 snakes. 68 out of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands believed to be hiding. It was a number so small, biologists said it made zero difference. To put it mildly, it was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. The snakes, with their perfect camouflage, could be coiled right at a hunter's feet, and they would never be seen. Still, Florida had no choice but to keep trying. The Python Challenge became a yearly event with even bigger prizes and more promotion. Some hunters got better. They became pros, learning to use thermal scopes and night vision gear. A few of these pros managed to get their hands on dozens of snakes in a single season. The winners were treated like local heroes, with one team in 2021 catching a python that was over 17 feet long. But the scientists' conclusion, whispered behind the scenes, was always the same. The math just didn't work. The snakes were breeding far, far faster than anyone could catch them. For every one they caught, 1,000 more were hatching. So officials realized the seasonal competitions were mostly for publicity. They needed a more professional, year-round strategy. In 2017, the South Florida Water Management District started the Python Elimination Program. This wasn't a game for amateurs anymore. This was a job. Paid hunters were trained, vetted, and licensed. They were given an hourly wage plus bonuses for every python they caught. The longer the snake, the bigger the bonus. These hunters were a different breed. They were swamp veterans. They went on patrols all night, gliding through the pitch-black water in small boats, scanning the canal banks with high-powered spotlights, looking for any movement, any out-of-place shadow. It was exhausting, perilous, and lonely work, and for a while it seemed more effective. The number of pythons removed started to climb into the thousands. By 2023, the program had removed over 10,000 pythons. But here's the kicker. The total number of pythons in the Everglades still wasn't going down. It was like every time they removed one snake, 2 more hatched to take its place. The financial cost was staggering. It took millions and millions of dollars to pay these contractors to chase snakes across an area of 1.5 million acres. That's bigger than the entire state of Delaware. They tried new tech like the Judas snakes. This is where they'd capture a male python, fit it with a radio tracker, and let it go during breeding season, hoping it would lead them to a giant egg-laying female. It worked, sometimes, but it was slow and expensive. The Everglades was just too big, too dense, and too full of hiding places. By the end of the 2010s, officials had to accept a bitter, humiliating fact. They could not beat the pythons with human strength. It was just impossible. So the question changed. If hunters couldn't outfight the snakes, could something else outsmart them? Good boys and bad snakes. When the bounty programs and pro hunters failed to make a real dent, wildlife managers realized they needed a new kind of hunter. They needed one that didn't rely on sight, luck, or just plain endurance. They needed a hunter that relied on pure, unmatched instinct. That's when Florida turned to an ally as old as humanity itself, the dog. In 2020, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, or FWC, launched a small but daring experiment. They would send in 2 specially trained dogs, detectors trained like canines, to do what humans simply could not: smell the invisible. Their names were Truman and Eleanor. Truman, a black Labrador, had the friendly, easygoing face of a family pet, but the intense focus of a soldier. Eleanor, a Dutch shepherd with alert, intelligent amber eyes, was bred for precision and courage. For months, these dogs went through a special boot camp. They were trained to recognize the faint, musky odor that Burmese pythons leave behind, a scent that humans can't detect at all, but which lingers in the grass and mud long after the snake has passed. Trainers hid pythons safely in crates and tall grass and even under waterlogged logs, rewarding the dogs every time they signaled a find. They learned to pinpoint the scent from dozens of feet away. Once they were in the field, it was a whole new ballgame. They worked on long leads, with handlers following close behind, watching their every move. The handlers carried GPS trackers as the dogs sniffed, paused, and then suddenly pulled toward some unseen target. The results came shockingly fast. In their very first month, the duo helped capture several large snakes that had eluded human crews for weeks. Truman's tail would go stiff. Eleanor would circle, her nose buried in the ground, and then suddenly freeze, the universal sign that the target was near. Moments later, a handler's flashlight beam would catch the slow, unmistakable ripple of scales in the undergrowth. It was astonishing to watch. These dogs were finding pythons in minutes in places where biologists had searched for hours and found nothing. Word spread quickly across the state agencies. For the first time in a long time, it felt like humans had a real fighting chance. But like always in the Everglades, the victories came at a high price. The swamp is a brutal place to work. It's incredibly hot, dangerously humid, and filled with other threats. The razor-sharp sawgrass can cut up a dog's paws and nose. The water is full of alligators and venomous cottonmouths, which could spell the end for a dog in an instant. The handlers had to be incredibly careful. They put cooling vests on their dogs, slipped on protective boots for their paws, and carried gallons of water, giving it to them constantly. And then there was the python itself, a predator that could easily harm a dog that got too close. Despite the difficulties, the dog teams revealed something incredibly important: a pattern. They found that a strong scent trail often led to nests or large clusters of eggs. The dogs weren't just catching one snake, they were revealing the structure of the invasion. They were finding the breeding grounds. But what many overlooked was the sheer scale of the problem. Truman and Eleanor were amazing, but they were still just 2 dogs. To cover that 1.5 million acre swamp, they would need hundreds of dog teams. It would cost tens of millions of dollars for the dogs, the training, the handlers, the vet care, and the transportation. The technique worked, but it was just another small tool, not a final solution. The dogs had proven one thing: the scent was the key. This victory opened up a new and much darker question. If the smell of a snake led the dogs, what smell led the snakes? A plan that crossed the line. After years of failed hunts and the limited success of the detector dogs, Florida's scientists and wildlife managers found themselves staring at a very difficult truth. To beat the pythons, they needed to stop chasing them. They needed to make the pythons come to them. To do that, they needed to understand what the snakes wanted most. The answer was simple, and it was deeply unsettling. They wanted rabbits. Specifically, they wanted marsh rabbits. These native animals were once one of the most common mammals in the entire Everglades. Now, thanks to the pythons, they were nearly wiped out in large areas. The question that followed was as risky as it was bold. Could they use live rabbits to lure the pythons out of hiding? At first, the very idea sparked outrage, but for some biologists, it was the only logical next step. You see, pythons are classic ambush predators. They don't chase their food. They sit perfectly still, sometimes for weeks, and wait for food to come to them. They are drawn by scent and by heat, not just by movement. In a few small, highly controlled, and very quiet studies, researchers built secure pens along known python trails in the swamp. Inside these pens, they placed live rabbits. Now, these pens were designed to be Fort Knox. They were built to protect the animals from any direct attack, but they were open enough to allow the rabbits' natural scent and their body heat to spread through the thick, humid air. What happened next stunned the teams. Within just a few weeks, pythons began appearing one after another, slithering out of the grass. At a single one of these study sites, more than 20 different pythons were seen moving toward the enclosures over the course of a few months. The rabbits, though terrified, were physically unharmed behind the strong wire barriers. They had become living, breathing magnets for one of the most hard-to-find predators on Earth. The findings were undeniable. The presence of a live rabbit could pull pythons from hundreds of yards away and concentrate them in a specific area. This made them incredibly easy to locate and remove. It was the first real proof that luring the snakes might work where brute force hunting had failed. But this success came at a huge moral cost. The images, even just the idea of trembling, terrified live rabbits being circled by giant constrictors, provoked a storm of outrage. Animal welfare groups and even some scientists inside the project were horrified. Public pressure grew fast. Critics called the experiments barbaric, arguing that no invasive species, no matter how bad, was worth the suffering of innocent animals. The state officials had no choice but to respond. Soon, the funding for all live bait trials was pulled and the program was shut down. But the thing nobody tells you is that ending the program made the next discovery possible. The principle was now proven. It wasn't the rabbit itself that mattered. It was the idea of the rabbit, the scent and the heat. The next question was obvious. Could they fake it? Could they imitate the scent, the heat, and the slight movement of a marsh rabbit without ever using a living creature? This is when the engineers got involved. Biologists, robotics experts, and tech specialists started working together. They began fusing wildlife science with advanced robotics. They examined every single trigger that lures a python. They used thermal cameras to measure the exact infrared heat signature of a real rabbit. They analyzed the thermal contrast between a warm 98-degree body and the cool, damp swamp air. They even took fur samples, analyzed the chemical compounds, and created a powerful synthetic musk that smelled exactly like a marsh rabbit. Every single factor was broken down and used as a data point for a mechanical copy. And so the rabbit blueprint was created. Scientists and engineers imagined a durable, waterproof decoy that could sit in the swamp for months. It would have internal heaters to give off warmth and tiny emitters to release the synthetic scent. It would even have little motors to make the ears twitch, imitating the nervous movements of a real rabbit. This wasn't just about attracting pythons, it was about data. Every decoy would have a hidden, motion-activated camera and sensors. It could become a silent 24/7 field researcher. The project moved from a wild idea to a real-world prototype, this time very quietly. The controversy over the live bait had taught them a lesson. For the first time, technology was offering a way to fight back without being cruel. But a huge billion-dollar question remained. Would the pythons, ancient masters of the swamp, really be fooled by a fake? Or would they just smell the plastic and wires and slither away? Project Decoy. This was it. The last-ditch effort. When Florida's first batch of robotic rabbits rolled off the assembly line, few people believed it would actually work. At sunrise, as the teams carried them into the field, the prototypes looked almost funny. They were small, soft-furred decoys, but they had wires, sensors, and tiny solar panels glinting in the mist. But these were no toys. Each one represented years of frustration and millions of dollars in research and development funding. They were designed to fool a predator that had, until now, outsmarted every other trap. The engineers called them robo-rabbits. The wildlife officers called them a last hope. Each decoy was a small marvel of practical, rugged engineering. They were built from weather-resistant polymers tough enough to survive the Florida sun and rain. They were coated in a layer of synthetic fur, and underneath that, a complex web of thermal pads. These pads were connected to a thermostat programmed to keep the decoy at a perfect 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, the exact temperature of a living, breathing marsh rabbit. Then there was the scent. Tiny, replaceable cartridges inside the robot would release the powerful synthetic chemical compound that mimicked rabbit musk, letting it drift on the swamp breeze. The scent was designed to be irresistible, and to complete the illusion, even the ears and nose could twitch, powered by tiny, silent micromotors programmed to move randomly. To a python's heat-sensing pits and its sensitive tongue, these machines were supposed to be the real deal. Hidden inside each one, behind a pair of black, glassy eyes, was a high-definition night vision camera. It was linked to a motion-triggered transmitter. As soon as something larger than a small bird slithered close, the system would wake up and send an alert with a photo to the biologists' phones stationed miles away. Powering all of this was the Florida sun. Each decoy had a small, efficient solar panel on its back connected to a set of rechargeable lithium-ion batteries. This allowed them to operate for weeks, even months, without any maintenance. They were anchored inside protective pins, not to protect the robot, but to keep other animals from dragging it off. When the first 120 units were deployed across known python hotspots, no one expected results right away. The swamp had crushed optimism before. The Everglades, however, reacted instantly. Right from the beginning, the field cameras started capturing scenes no one had ever seen up close. Huge pythons were seen sliding up to the decoys. Their tongues were flicking fast, tasting the air, their patterned bodies shining under the moonlight. The footage was incredible. Many of them struck the decoys immediately, wrapping their massive coils around the motionless, fur-covered robots, trying to crush the life out of the machine. The teams were ecstatic. It was working. The data started coming in. The robotic bunnies weren't just bringing the snakes, they were tracing their movements. Every camera activation was like adding another dot to an ever-growing digital map of python hotspots. The researchers could now be sure of where the breeding females were, which canals they used as highways, and what times of night the snakes were most active. The decoys had turned into both bait and a massive intelligence network. But then, something else started happening. The wow factor turned into a what is happening factor. The experiment was out of control because the decoys were, quite simply, too good. The cameras started capturing everything. Massive 12-foot alligators, curious bobcats, and even extremely rare and endangered Florida panthers were being drawn in by the powerful synthetic musk. The scent wasn't just a rabbit smell, it had become a dinner bell for the entire swamp. What many overlooked was that they had created an irresistible lure for all predators, not just the one they were targeting. A camera on a single decoy logged 17 different species visiting it in just one night. Then the decoys started to disappear. Not just one or two, dozens of them went offline. The GPS trackers just stopped. Researchers in airboats went out to find them. What they found was the first sign of the disaster. They located a massive 20-foot alligator perished on a mud bank. It hadn't been in a fight. It seemed to have just stopped working. When they opened its stomach, they didn't find a rabbit or a bird. They found a $4,000 mass of mangled plastic, wires, and a shattered lithium-ion battery. The solution had become a new kind of poison. The robots, designed to save the native ecosystem, were now being eaten by the very alligators and panthers they were meant to protect. The chemicals from the batteries were leaching into the water. The hard plastic was causing fatal blockages. The experiment was spinning wildly out of control, creating a brand new ecological problem. Officials were in a total panic. They had to scramble to retrieve the remaining units before more native animals were harmed. But poisoning the natives wasn't even the worst part. The real horror was what it was doing to the rabbits. The python's new toy. This is the part of the story that truly shocked everyone. This is the part that was hidden from the public reports, the detail that changes everything. The synthetic musk in the robo-rabbits was so powerful, so perfect, that it was doing something nobody, not one single scientist, had predicted. It was drawing in the last remaining survivors of the real marsh rabbit population. Biologists who were tracking the few rabbits left in the area started to notice a terrifying, heartbreaking pattern. Tiny, delicate rabbit tracks in the mud, all leading straight to the robotic decoys. The robo-rabbits were acting like a siren's call. You see, rabbits are social. They are drawn to the scent of other rabbits. These robots, smelling more like a rabbit than a real rabbit, were gathering the last real ones from their hidden burrows and luring them directly into the python-infested hotspots. Florida was, completely by accident, baiting its own endangered species and serving them up on a silver platter to the invaders. The plan to mimic the rabbits was now eradicating them. It was a complete and total catastrophe. The project was immediately halted. The official story was that the technology was too expensive and the results were inconclusive. They blamed the gators eating the robots. They blamed the cost. They blamed everything but the real reason. Because what the cameras captured in those final frantic weeks, that was what truly shocked everyone to their core. The thing nobody tells you is that the pythons, they learned. The footage from the last active cameras right before the units were pulled showed a chilling, unbelievable change in behavior. The smartest of the pythons, the big, experienced females, they stopped attacking the robots. The footage was bizarre. A python would slither up, slow and curious. It would taste the air, its tongue flicking. It would look at the decoy, maybe nudge it with its nose, and then move away. They weren't striking the decoys anymore, they were waiting. The cameras captured pythons coiled in perfect ambush 30 feet away from the robot, hidden in the grass. They had learned that the robot itself was fake. It was hard plastic. It didn't bleed, it wasn't food. But they also learned that the powerful smell attracted real food. They realized that raccoons, birds, and the last of the marsh rabbits would all come to investigate the scent. The robots had become hunting tools for the pythons. The very experiment designed to trap the pythons had instead taught them how to be more efficient hunters. It taught them to stop wasting energy on fake prey and to simply wait for the real prey that the robots lured in for them. The hunters had become the helpers. The out-of-control part wasn't just a malfunction, it was an education. Florida had accidentally trained its greatest enemy to be even smarter. The experiment designed to save the Everglades had backfired in the most shocking way possible. It had poisoned the native predators, lured the last of the real rabbits to their doom, and given the pythons a smart new way to hunt. So what do you think really happened? Was it a simple failure, a cryptid cover-up, or a hacked military test? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe for more hidden stories.